time's over.
Whoa!
Turn around.
At some point in our lives, all of us have committed recoiling dumb mistakes. It's okay, because nobody's perfect. As long as those silly mistakes don't cost millions or billions of cash, right? Or even worse, cost lives. Well, here are 15 of the most expensive mistakes in all history. But before we proceed, don't forget to click that like button and subscribe. Number 15. The trains are too fat.
To tell them that these 2,000 trains they'd ordered at a cost of $70 billion were too fat.
Not to disrespect trains, but in 2014, France's nationally state-owned railway company, SNCF, had just bought 2,000 trains for 15 billion euros. The only problem was that the operator had forgotten the fact that some 1,300 platforms that were 50 plus years old had different measurements. This meant the newly purchased trains wouldn't fit. This simple oversight cost the company around 50 million euros. Imagine adding that to the purchase cost of the new trains. In order to salvage the situation, SNCF decided to expand the old platforms, which took 2 years in a process that was as equally as expensive but more so time-consuming. Number 14. Superman's expensive shave.
Please don't make me do this.
After official filming for Justice League ended, Warner Brothers decided that some scenes needed to be redone. But at that time, Henry Cavill, who played Superman, had already started filming for another film, Mission Impossible Fallout, and his character required him to have facial hair. Even though Warner Brothers begged Paramount to allow Cavill to shave the mustache for the reshoot, they wouldn't budge. In the end, on top of the $25 million cost of reshoots, Warner Brothers had to pay additional fees for the visual effects team to digitally remove every single hair. What's worse, Justice League turned out to be a box office disappointment. Number 13. Who rejected Netflix? Ever since it took advantage of the digital age, Netflix has become a massive streaming platform with over 183 million paid subscribers all over the world. But in the year 2000, when Netflix was still just a humble DVD rental by mail, its CEO, Reed Hastings, had approached Blockbuster CEO Antioco and asked him to buy the company for $50 million, to which the latter rejected. To be fair, at that time, Netflix was losing money. Though regrettable in the end, this is certainly not the first or the biggest bitter what-ifs in the business world. Number 12. Oops, I lost my space probe? In 1998, NASA launched its Mars Climate Orbiter to survey and record the red planet's surface and atmosphere. The following year, the space probe couldn't be located, which means NASA just lost its $125 million equipment. As it turns out, the engineers at Lockheed Martin used the imperial system when calculating the coordinates of a communication station, while NASA used the metric system. The resulting miscommunication caused the orbiter to miss its mark, forever doomed to float lost in space. Number 11. A stockbroker's typo. Aren't typos so irritating? Well, in 2005, one typo cost a Japanese company millions of dollars. A stockbroker from Mizuho Securities Co. had mistakenly offered 610,000 shares in JCOM stock for only 1 yen, when it should have been the other way around. The cheap stock certainly caught the attention of a lot of investors who immediately bought it. This spurred an investigation, and the president of Mizuho Securities, along with his executives, publicly apologized at the Tokyo Stock Exchange. Thankfully, due to the stock exchange rules which only allowed shares to be sold at minimum price of 572,000 yen, some of the loss was mitigated. However, it still incurred damages worth $225 million. Number 10. The Cerro Grande wildfire. In what was supposed to be a controlled burn at the Bandelier National Monument in New Mexico, quickly became the state's worst wildfire in history. Strong winds quickly carried the fire in all directions outside of the designated lines until workers lost control of it. The fire raged for a month and scorched neighboring towns of Los Alamos and White Rock. By the time it was finally extinguished, total property damage amounted to $1 billion. Fortunately, no one died. Number 9. The cost of drunk driving. Speaking of billion-dollar mistakes, in 1989, an inebriated captain had crashed the Exxon Valdez oil tanker into the Prince William Sound. 11 million gallons of oil spilled and covered 1,300 miles of the Alaskan coast. This was to be the worst case of oil spill in the US. Fishing business and wildlife was severely impacted. Though Captain Hazelwood was later convicted for drunk driving, costs of legal fines, cleanup operations, and fines reached $4.4 billion in total. Number 8. London's Walkie-Scorchie.
Receive them. Now you can do the same with light, and that's what this building is doing. Basically, you've got a vast area that's collecting sunlight.
You know that expression, "it's so ugly it hurts my eyes"? Well, our next item can literally melt yours. The 20 Fenchurch Street Tower stands out visually for its distinct shape, which resembles a walkie-talkie. Due to planning flaws, it's also been dubbed Fryscraper, Walkie-Scorchie, and had even received the Carbuncle Cup for the worst new building in the UK. This was because reflections from the sunlight bounced off the building's curved reflective windows. The concentrated sunlight started causing fires, even melting a man's Jaguar. Eventually, the building's developers had to compensate for damages, and a temporary sunscreen had to be put in surrounding areas until a permanent solution was found. Number 7. King Tut's Glued Beard. Ancient artifacts are priceless and irreplaceable. That's why expert curators are called when handling them. When museum workers in Cairo noticed that the beard from King Tut's funeral mask was coming loose, an inexperienced restorer did the first logical solution that came to mind: glue it back on using epoxy. A curator later said in an interview, "Epoxy has a very high property for attaching, and is used on metal or stone, but I think it wasn't suitable for an outstanding object like Tutankhamun's golden mask." Well, at least he didn't try taping it together. Number 6. Quaker buys Snapple. In 1994, Quaker would commit one of the worst corporate mergers in history by buying Snapple. At that point, Quaker was a total oatmeal empire and was willing to dish out $1.7 billion. After the merger, there were those who commented that Quaker may have overvalued the iced tea company. And they were right. Though Snapple was relatively popular at those times, soon enough, several beverage companies had quickly produced their own competing products. Eventually, Snapple struggled to outdo its competitors, and by 1997, Quaker had no choice but to sell it again for just $3 million, resulting to a total of $1.4 billion loss. Number 5. Titanic. The tragedy of the RMS Titanic is perhaps the most iconic shipwreck in our history. Before it embarked on its main voyage from Southampton to New York, the ship was perceived to be unsinkable. However, 4 days after it set sail in 1912, the crew ignored warnings of an iceberg ahead. In one sweep, the ship's whole right side had been scraped and the unsinkable ship sank. That day, a total of 1,517 people had died. Number 4. Hateful Guitar.
Time's over. Turn around.
If you've watched Quentin Tarantino's Hateful Eight, you might remember a scene where Kurt Russell angrily takes a guitar from actress Jennifer Leigh and smashes it. Well, let me tell you now, Jennifer's shocked face was no acting at all. As it turns out, the production crew had borrowed a 150-year-old guitar from the Martin Guitar Museum for that scene, but they'd planned to switch it out with a cheap one right before Kurt smashes it. However, a clueless Kurt continues his acting and, before anyone can stop him, smashes the guitar to everyone's horror. After the incident, Martin Guitar Museum vowed never to lend their guitars to filmmakers again. Number 3. Lost Bitcoin. In 2009, British IT worker James Howell started using his personal laptop to mine Bitcoin. At that time, Bitcoins weren't worth that much, and only a few had the foresight to know that the cryptocurrency would actually take off after a few years. Shortly after gaining 7,500 Bitcoins, he accidentally spills coffee to his PC. He was able to recover important files, including the hard drive where the Bitcoins were stored. The hard drive sat in his drawer for years until he carelessly disposed of it during a move. After seeing the way Bitcoin took off, he realized his mistake, but it was already too late. Bitcoin peaked in 2017, valuing more than $19,000. That means Mr. Howell just threw away $148 million. Number 2. Deepwater Horizon spill.
Square miles of the Gulf of Mexico, and it could start reaching the United States coast within hours.
When the British company responsible for the Deepwater Horizon rigger had cut corners on safety, this led to an explosion that resulted in the worst oil spill in human history. 210 million gallons of oil spread through the Gulf of Mexico. For months on end, workers desperately tried to stop the flow of oil, but it had already threatened marine life habitats from Florida to Louisiana. What was cutting corners to preserve money and effort backfired with catastrophic consequences. In the end, the company had spent $61 billion for all the damages. Number 1. Chernobyl disaster.
Noble to take advantage of reactor number 4's downtime by carrying out a safety test on an emergency core cooling feature.
Earlier, we saw design flaws resulting in melted cars and small fires. This time, it resulted to the worst, most deadly nuclear accident of all time. In 1986, a power outage drill had led to uncontrolled reactions that hospitalized 134 workers due to radiation exposure. 31 of them died in the following weeks, and later on, 14 more died due to cancer. Well, that's it. I'm sure there's a lot more we missed, so feel free to comment down below. Again, don't forget to like this video, hit subscribe and that bell button for more content like this. See you next time.